On this channel, I've done a lot of niche videos. So niche that even some dedicated Lord of the Rings fans will have no idea what I'm talking about. And many of these niche videos have ended up on my Middle-earth Mysteries series. After looking at that playlist, I can confidently say that this video is amongst the most niche of them all. So, what am I going to be talking about? Well, none other than the mystery of King Bledorfin. If you have no idea who King Bledorfin is, don't feel bad. Even I've only mentioned him once on this channel. That was on another Middle-earth Mysteries video about Dorwinion. So who or what is King Bledorfin? Well, that's the thing. We don't know at all. Because Tolkien only ever mentioned him once outside of his drafts, and that was in The Hobbit. Yes, of course, another person, place, or concept that was mentioned in The Hobbit that pretty much appears nowhere else, like giants, talking handkerchiefs, and spontaneous musicals. Here is the passage in question that mentions Bledorfin. From that, the talk turned to the Great Hoard itself and to the things that Thorin and Balin remembered. They wondered if they were still lying there unharmed in the hall below, the spears that were made for the armies of the great King Bledorfin, long since dead. Each had a thrice forged head, and their shafts were inlaid with cunning gold, but they were never delivered or paid for. And that's it. That's all we know about Bledorfin. He was a great king who ruled sometime in the late Third Age, who put in an order to the dwarves of Erebor for well-crafted spears for his armies, but for some reason, those spears never made it to him, and his payment never made it to the dwarves. So who is King Bledorfin? What is he? Where did he rule from? Where did he live? And what happened to him in the end? Realistically, we can only make educated guesses using the previously mentioned passage and some of the other associated information we have about Middle-earth. Perhaps the easiest thing to answer is the when. By 2942, when Bilbo and company are trying to take back Erebor, Bledorfin is described as being long since dead. This is rather vague because long since dead could be used to describe anything between years to decades to centuries. But we do have a starting date on Bledorfin's supposed existence, or at the very least, his relevancy in relation to the dwarves of Erebor. Given the dwarves only founded the kingdom at Erebor in 1999, it means Bledorfin existed in the late Third Age sometime between 1999 and 2942. Okay, a person supposedly existing in a 1,000-year period is pretty dodgy history, especially if that person is just a man with a normal lifespan. Alternatively, if Bledorfin was an elf, he could have existed for that entire time period, but we'll get to that later. But we can say that Bledorfin definitely existed before 2770, the year Smaug took Erebor, but how long he lived past that, or whether he even lived past that date, is unknown, except that he was long dead before 2942. If Bledorfin was alive in 2770, it would explain why he never received his spears. Smaug took Erebor. But we don't know if Smaug is the reason why Bledorfin never received his spears. Notably, the passage doesn't make it clear, and says the spears were never even paid for. Keeping that in mind, it's possible Bledorfin was even long dead before Smaug took the mountain, and that the spears had just been sitting there for hundreds of years. Okay, so we know Bledorfin definitely existed between 1999 and 2770, and possibly up until around the year of 2900. But what else do we know? Unfortunately, not that much. We don't even know if Bledorfin was an elf or a mortal man. There's some minor hints in his name. John D. Ratliff, a Tolkien scholar who specializes on The Hobbit, believes that Bledorfin is a Noldoran name or a Gnomish name from Tolkien's earliest works, but there is no direct translation. There's also the fact that the thin part of the name translates to grey in Sindarin, like in Thingol. However, once again, there is no neat one-for-one translation for the entirety of the name. But the etymology of his name doesn't really matter for a number of reasons. Firstly, both men and elves have been known to take elven names, especially Sindarin names. And secondly, if Bledorfin is an elf, he's likely a Navari, a dark elf, so we're likely dealing with a Navarin language, which, while it would definitely share some things with Noldoran or Sindarin, it would still be different. Likewise, we know very little about the Mannish languages in that area, so there's no definitive way of ruling out that Bledorfin is simply a Mannish name from some unknown language. Okay, so the what and the who leads us to a dead end, but the where can do a little bit more heavy lifting for us. Once again, there's little actual concrete evidence to go off, except for the fact that Bloodorfin's kingdom must have been at least close enough to have ties with the dwarves of Erebor. This would presumably place it somewhere in Rhovanion or around the Sea of Rhûn, but there's no way of knowing for certain. These lands were relatively well populated, even in the late Third Age. Northmen lived in the wide lands between the Carnan and the Kelduin, the Easterlings lived beyond those rivers and around the Sea of Rhûn, and of course we have the mysterious land of Dorwinion, home to men of unknown origin, or Avaran elves, or even both. We can probably rule out Dale, because the city is described as having a lord and not a king before Bard, but that doesn't rule out a Northman kingdom popping up somewhere else along the Carnan or the Kelduin. These lands were inhabited for a very long time, and the people there were numerous enough so that they could combine into a strong kingdom after Bard slew Smaug. But we have remarkably little information about them before the time of Thror, King Under the Mountain. So it's very much possible that there was a Northman kingdom at some point between the Kelduin and the Carnan, beyond the notice of scholars from Gondor who recorded most of the history of the Third Age. Alternatively, Bloodorfin could have been a ruler of a people of Easterlings who dwelt somewhere around the Sea of Rhûn and were friendly to the dwarves. Remember, the Easterlings were not a monolithic group. There were good and bad Easterlings, with many different cultures and outlooks. It's possible that Bloodorfin was an Easterling king who was on bad terms with Sauron's forces and was gearing up for war as Sauron's power grew. And as I said before, we have the mysterious land of Dorwinion, which I've done an entire episode on. Dorwinion may have been home to elves, men, or even both, which would allow for Bloodorfin to be either an elf or a man. Also, we know the people of Dorwinion were likely rich, given how they traded their wine upriver even to the elves of Mirkwood, so that would explain why Bloodorfin was buying such expensive weaponry from the dwarves. However, given the dwarves never actually received the payment, it's possible he was also a con artist. In this case, given Dorwinion seems to still be around in 2942, so if it was indeed Bloodorfin's kingdom, perhaps he did not meet a violent end at all. Or perhaps an even more exotic answer is that Bloodorfin ruled over an Avaran land beyond the Sea of Rhûn that was in need of weaponry. We have very little information about the Avari in the Third Age, except that some of them had been steadily drifting westwards. Whether they had enough power left in the Third Age to field great armies is unknown, but if they did, what we know of Avaran weaponry would suggest that, yes, they would really need the dwarves to forge those spears. Okay, we've made some progress, so let's get to the final question. What happened to him? Well, this one's easy. He's dead, we know that. But how did he die? The answer depends on whether he was a man or an elf. If he was an elf, there's only one way he could have died: violently. And if an elven king dies violently, it generally doesn't bode well for his people. Unfortunately, this could mean that if Bloodorfin was some Avaran king, his people might have been wiped out at some point late in the Third Age. This might explain why the spears were never paid for. Perhaps Bloodorfin never even got the chance. If he was a mortal man, the answer could be as simple as old age, and perhaps Bloodorfin's kingdom never even met a violent end. There is the possibility of a violent end, obviously, but in this case, perhaps the spears were going to be paid for, but Smaug struck first, and the trade was never completed. It could be the case that wherever Bloodorfin's kingdom was, it still might exist somewhere beyond our knowledge, such as the mysterious realm of Dorwinion. So let's summarise. Bloodorfin was the king of a mysterious realm somewhere in relative close proximity to Erebor, likely somewhere in Rhovanion or around the Sea of Rhûn. He existed late in the Third Age, definitely between the years of 1999 and 2770, but he was considered long dead by the year of 2942. He was powerful enough to field great armies and was seemingly rich enough to have bought weaponry from the dwarves, although he never ended up paying for it, nor did he receive his weapons. And everything else is guesswork. The exact location of his realm is unknown. Whether he was a man or an elf is unknown. Whether he ruled over Easterlings, Northmen, Avari, or a combination of peoples is also unknown. And although we know he died, we don't know the manner of his death, nor the fate of the kingdom he ruled over. So what do you guys think? I've made a few suggestions as to who Bloodorfin might have been, and where he might have come from, but I want to see some theories in the comments section. The more in depth, the better. Give me some good fan fiction. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed it, or at least found it interesting. If you have any other incredibly niche ideas for Middle-earth mysteries, or just in general, feel free to suggest them in the comments section. But other than that, cheers, farewell, and remember, Bloodorphin might be long dead, but he'll always live in our hearts.